jump right into it. It's October 2nd, 1999. Alan and his two kids, 3-year-old Jaryd and 6-year-old Jocelyn, were staying at the Poudre River Resort, which was owned by Alan and his brother Arlen. Alan, in several interviews, talked about how he was attracted to the canyon. He liked being out in the trees and just kind of being out in the wild. And I equate this to how people in Wisconsin always go up north on the weekends. They have a house on a lake somewhere and they relax. So
sure. So this guy's like living his dream. Like he loves the mountains. He opens up a resort there so he can basically live where he wants to and work there at the same time.
Yeah, him and his brother own this little resort, and it sounds like a pretty cool place. They would wake up in the morning. They would close the resort at 11 o'clock at night. They didn't have a care in the world. Even if they're working, they were together. Their family was together 24/7. So that's what they really enjoyed. In this fall time, there was a Christian singles group that was staying at the lodge, and they weren't paying any rent at the lodge, but they're helping Alan prepare for winter. So apparently
they like worked off their bill.
Yeah, and apparently Alan knew a lot of these people in the group, and I think his ex-wife was a member of the group. I read that in one of the articles.
That's not awkward at all.
Yeah, so this whole timeline starts when the group wanted to go hiking around this trout farm, which was like 1.5 miles away from the resort. Alan, thinking that they were going to the trout farm, was cool with his two kids going with them. And he thought, I know some of these people in the group.
Okay, so it wasn't a group of strangers he sent his kids off with. He knows these people and they've been living there for a while.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So he thought they were just going like 1 mile down the road to this trout farm. They're going to kind of stop around a bit and then they would be back. Like I said, it's October 2nd, 1999, so 10 a.m. in the morning. So 3-year-old Jaryd and his 6-year-old sister Jocelyn and 11 members of this Christian singles network leave the river resort. The dad thinks they're going to this trout farm 1.5 miles away, but for some reason, while en route to the trout farm, they decided to go 15 miles west of the resort to the Big South Trail that you mentioned in the beginning of your location profile.
And they didn't tell the dad that they made a 16 or 14 mile deviation from the plan?
They did not. And I wonder if Alan had known they were going to the Big South Trail originally, if he would have let his kids go. I'm guessing he wouldn't have.
I'm guessing I would agree with that, because if he really knows that mountain well, and if what you're saying, what you said earlier, that people know this is a harder trail, he'd be like, no, you shouldn't go there. But if that group was not familiar with the area, maybe they thought they're just going to find a nicer spot.
Yeah. So, in several of the interviews, Alan talked about how he gave permission for Jaryd and Jocelyn to go under the assumption they're going to the trout farm. He talks about how Jaryd never liked to wear his shoes, so he kind of left his shoes untied. He goes into descriptions of kind of what kind of clothes he was wearing, just like I said in the character profile, the fleece jacket, the blue sweatpants, no survival gear.
Sure.
Bill Nelson, who is the undersheriff, we mentioned him in the character profile. He mentions that the church group went up to the Big South Trail, they parked at the trailhead, and then they started walking down the trail. This happens in big groups. Bill said the group started to separate, so some of the faster hikers kind of started moving forward, and some of the slower hikers were in the back. There was one adult with Jaryd and his sister at the time, and they seemed to be hiking ahead of everybody else. I'm assuming, Jaryd is a little kid. He's kind of running down the trail, so the adult's trying to stay with him. This group of 11 plus Jaryd and Jocelyn are hiking down the trail, and Jaryd, Jocelyn, and one adult are kind of ahead of the pack, and everyone else is kind of lagging behind.
Sure.
Butch, which I mentioned earlier, he gives us a description of the Big South Trailhead, and this is where I was telling you earlier, Joe, I was kind of like, I don't know if I'd let a little kid hike this trail alone. Even that young, I don't know if I'd want him hiking with me either. But so Butch describes the trail as moderate, has ups and downs. He said you could take a kid on it as long as you kept the kid in line and hung on to him. He said there were some areas where the ledges were only 24 inches wide, and you had loose shale all the way down to the river. So
what was the drop off like?
They never mentioned how the drop off, but I mean,
well, I guess for a 3-year-old, it doesn't matter if it's a drop off that goes to a river. If it's 5 feet or 10 feet, it's still.
Yeah. And, Butch goes on to say, he said, it's a moderate trail. It's pretty tough. He goes, if you're not in shape, it'll take a lot out of you. So, and he's referring to an adult. So being a 3-year-old.
Kids aren't in shape. They just can't be.
No. So, all right. So now we are fast forwarding to 11:30 a.m. So 2 fishermen about a mile and a half up the trail from the main group see Jaryd and talk to him briefly. And this was near the Camp 2 site. It was reported that when Jaryd stopped and talked to the fisherman, he asked something about, are there bears in the area? The fisherman said, no, we haven't seen anything. And then, believing that Jaryd will soon be met by the group of people hiking behind him, they kind of just went back to fishing, and Jaryd just kept walking down the trail. So at this point, Jaryd is by himself. So between 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., Jaryd somehow got away from the adult and his sister and now was walking down the trail by himself. Reports from the sheriff's department say that it was unclear if Jaryd was between the two groups or ahead of the faster group when he met the fishermen. But the important thing to note here, these fishermen were the last people that saw Jaryd.
Okay.
So no one after 11:30 a.m. saw Jaryd again.
So the 11:30 time frame, that's when they said they talked to him, or that's when that group caught up to him and asked where Jaryd was?
That was when the fishermen say they talked to Jaryd.
Okay, so he was alive and known where he was at 11:30.
Yeah, so approximately about 12:15 p.m., the hiking group realizes that Jaryd's missing, and they start searching for him for about an hour. Some members of the group returned to the River Lodge to alert Alan, and in one of the interviews, Alan was kind of napping, and they tell him, we have a situation, your son's not hurt, he's just missing.
Jeez. Trying to soften the blow of they freaking lost his kid.
He wakes up from his nap in a panic. He runs out to his car. He's like, where are you guys? Where was he? And they tell him, oh, we were 15 miles up the road at the Big South Trail. And he's like, how did you guys get that far up the road? Because remember, Alan the whole time thought they were hiking at this trout farm just a mile away. Alan's speeding up the road towards the trailhead. Some of the other members of the group are still out there looking for Jaryd. Now, this is kind of strange. A couple of the people in the group, including Jaryd's sister, claim to have heard a scream. But when they were asked by law enforcement, was it a scream of panic? They said it sounded like a scream of joy, like he was playing with somebody, like a playful scream. But they never were able to actually verify if there was a scream or not. It's just kind of a weird thing to hear.
I think initially too, does he think he's playing hide and seek with these people? And you know what I mean? Like when you're a kid, you want to kind of give away your position. You make a little noise. Possibly.
Maybe he was playing hide and seek with maybe the fisherman. Who knows? The fisherman didn't report any type of screams. So
yeah, I'm just saying in general, a kid will just hide. A 3-year-old doesn't do things that are logical.
Bill Nelson, the undersheriff, we're going to mention him quite a bit in this timeline. In one interview, he goes on and kind of describes what happened at this point in time. He writes, as Jaryd, as a 3-year-old, is running and playing and having a good time, and I believe there was something 10 to 20 minutes worth of time that she lost track. And he's referring to the adult that was with them.
Sure.
He then goes on to say, the adult realized, I haven't seen him for a while, and when they went up to try and find him, they kept going down the trail thinking they would catch up with him, and they never did. It sounds like just an innocent mistake. I'm sure that the woman that was in charge of keeping track of him to this day probably never let herself live it down.
Yeah, unless she's mentally unstable or something. But that would ruin you.
And I think what probably makes it worse is it sounds like everyone in this group kind of knew each other and knew Alan, so they weren't just strangers. So that makes it harder. Fast forward to 4 p.m. So we're still on October 2nd. Alan had just spent the last couple hours up there at the trail. He was running down the trail. I remember One of the interviews said he was screaming his name, nicknames that he used to call him, just frantically trying to find him. He drives back down to the lodge to call 911, and he finds out that someone had already notified the searchers. So at 4 p.m. now, law enforcement has been notified that Jaryd's missing. So again, some of these cases, you can go a day or two before the person's reported missing. This was quick. He went missing about, they realized he was missing about 12:15 p.m. and law enforcement was notified at 4 p.m.
Yeah, I think too, like the age of the subject is really what dictates that. Like if it's an adult, it's different. But if it's a 3-year-old kid and no one can find him, I think people mobilize pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you or I went missing, they'd probably be like, well, those two bozos can survive
how
in the
many
woods
times
for a night.
how many times have you been like a few hours behind your arrival time? I mean, that's why anytime I leave my itinerary, I give a window of like 4 hours, because it's like you don't know what you're gonna go into. Sometimes if it's a new trail, you can kind of look at a topo map and look at the profile and guess. But if it's the first time you're doing it, you don't know what you're gonna run into.
It's always that like hiker's joke when, you're hiking up elevation on a trail and you're like, oh, just over that ridge will be done. And then you get over it. Oh, no, just over the next ridge and we'll be done. Like it never ends.
What was it? Was it Mountain House Foods? One of the freeze-dried food companies puts those little quotes on the bottom. Yeah. And it was like the commandments of hiking. It's always farther than it seems. And never trust a fart, like things like that are written on the bottom.
Never trust a trail sign that has the mileage on it.
Oh, absolutely not ever. But yeah. Okay.
So 4 p.m. law enforcement is notified that Jaryd is missing. 4:26 p.m. an emergency pager alert is sent to the Laramie County Emergency Services Specialist Bill Nelson, the guy that we've been talking about.
Okay.
And I find it funny, an emergency pager alert.
They must have like a special system for unique search and rescue cases.
Some of the people listening might be too young to remember pagers, but they were a thing at one time.
Yeah.
So 5:07 p.m. now, a pager alert is sent to the county search and rescue manager, George Jansen. They said lag time here is standard procedure to allow mountain deputies to verify if a search is needed. They sometimes, I've read this before, they won't immediately send people out there. Like you said, Joe, sometimes people are, slow to come off a trail and people panic and think they're
they give it time to shake out.
Fast forward again now to 6:30 p.m. and search personnel reach the lower Big South Trailhead. And from reports I read at this time, they deployed around 65 search and rescue members, like trained people. So already within 4 or 5 hours, you've got a good sizable team of professionals out in the field searching.
Sure.
8 p.m. rolls around. Searchers from the lower and upper trailhead meet at campsites 7 and 8. No sign of Jaryd. The search teams plan to expand and bring in more resources, including a helicopter, which I'm going to get into in a second. We're moving into the next day, so now it's October 3rd, 1999. 7 a.m., we get a report that the overnight search team members are told to be extremely vigilant at dawn, as family members tell searchers Jaryd wakes up at dawn. They also deployed dive teams to the Big South River. So they had searchers out there at night even, stopping through the woods.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't stop. You got a 3-year-old kid in October in the Rockies at night. Like you're up against a clock of survival.
Yeah. It's going to be tough for a 3-year-old to, he could make it through the night. We don't know the weather conditions. I believe they were pretty calm weather conditions. There wasn't any snow or rain during the search. At least nothing came up in any of the reports that explicitly said that, there was heavy snow or heavy rain.
They couldn't do something as a result of weather or some other incident.
So 7 a.m. rolls around and an Air Force helicopter, a Huey UH-1N from F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, makes a first flight through the area and then heads to Fort Collins Loveland Municipal Airport to refuel. This helicopter refuels and then heads back out around 3:30 p.m. It gets out to the search area and then it starts struggling with the fuel load and mountain conditions and started stalling out. and it ended up falling 100 feet and then crashing up in the Big South Trail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
they like put too much fuel in for the lift.
That, it didn't say, but I'm guessing by that they mentioned fuel load in mountain conditions that somebody miscalculated.
Yeah.
And there was too much weight and it couldn't get enough lift. On board the helicopter that crashed were 4 Air Force personnel and then Mark Sheets, who was a Loveland resident, and he was one of the county's search and rescue members. The report goes on to say that Sheets was the only crew member not in a seat. He was actually on the floor with the door wide open, and he saw the rotors hit the tops of the trees and pieces of the helicopter spray into the forest. He tried to shut the door, but a severed tree limb came through and struck the Air Force doctor in the face, fracturing his eye socket. The copter ended up crashing, but all 4 of the Air Force crew were able to escape the helicopter. Sheets was trapped in it, and he was able to get pulled out of the copter, but he suffered some pretty severe injuries. He suffered a severe concussion, a 13-inch L-shaped gash that left his femur exposed. He also suffered 3 broken vertebrae in his lower back and a broken shoulder.
Wow.
So he was pretty torn up. Amazingly, everyone survived the crash. You'll learn later on in the timeline that because of this crash, they weren't able to search some of the areas where Jaryd was, that presumed to be. So,
oh, geez.
Yeah. So again, an issue early on in the search, affected their ability to search the full area. So it always seems to happen. I don't know why. Thankfully, everyone on the helicopter survived. So 6 p.m. rolls around. All 5 aboard the helicopter transported to the hospital, and they survived, but they all had significant injuries. So fast forward to October 4th. The search stretched into the 3rd day now. Searchers combed riverbanks.
I do want to say real quick, Mike, because I was just looking where that Air Force base is. I was thinking it was more mid.
Yeah.
It's near Cheyenne, which is just north of Denver. So
okay.
They should totally know how to fly through the mountain.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe just somebody made a mistake.
Sure.
Didn't do their calculation correctly, or maybe there was a mechanical issue. The research I did didn't specify what actually happened to the helicopter, but
okay.
So like I was saying, it's October 4th now, and the search stretched into the 3rd day. Searchers were combing riverbanks, up steep slopes. Dive teams peered into small pools left in the narrow, slow-moving rivers. They had a plane that was passing overhead. They had a llama helicopter, and I actually had to look this up. It's a real helicopter called a llama.
A llama helicopter?
Yeah. From a company called I'm butchering the name, but it was from a company based out of Fort Collins, and they joined searchers, but they were also encountering swirling winds that required full power to prevent crashing. So,
oh wow! So that's probably all those peaks that we were talking about causing all those issues.
Yeah. So a second helicopter in the search almost crashed. So, like we were saying about weather conditions in the Rockies, they can get pretty gnarly in a hurry.
Yeah.
So, and another issue they were starting to have by the 4th was they had a lot of well-meaning but ill-equipped people trying to join in on the search. So,
so they're fighting off inexperienced quote-unquote searchers while trying to coordinate helicopters crashing, helicopters almost crashing, and look for this 3-year-old.
Yeah.
So it's just a big cluster.
Yeah. So the sheriff's department mentioned in several articles I read that they really were having an issue with, these people were well-meaning. They really wanted to help, but they just weren't equipped. And we've talked about this in a lot of other episodes. You really got to come at these searches in a very systematic way so you don't disturb, the search area.
Sure.
Especially for canine units.
Well, and if you're not trained, you don't know what to look for.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when you're looking for a certain thing, especially for a small child in a big area, because, you've wandered off trail or gone with people that go off trail, like 20 feet off trail, you can all of a sudden lose sight of people, and that's an adult. So you have a kid wandering for 20 minutes, like without anyone watching him.
Yeah.
He could be anywhere.
The next couple of days, so October 5th through the 7th, more than 200 trained searchers, dozens of dog teams, professional trackers, a dive team, and a plane search for Jaryd without finding any solid clues. they've really thrown everything they had at it, and they're coming up with nothing. So
not even clothing,
nothing.
no sign at all.
No tracks. There was mention from the undersheriff that some of the tracking dogs were picking up some, weird scents and kind of tracking in, certain areas, but I can get into that a little later.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just hit me. I'm like, we didn't talk about this canine person that you introduced in the beginning. So that's coming?
That's coming.
Okay, good.
October 8th, 1999, it's 7 p.m. The search for Jaryd is suspended due to lack of clues, and the family's notified. So he went missing midday on the 2nd, and the search lasted all the way through most of the day on the 8th. And then, at some point, resources are finite. They can't search indefinitely for him.
Well, and a kid that age is not living that long.
No one, a 3-year-old's going to have a tough time living that many days on his own out in the woods. So Bill Nelson,
especially in the mountains in October.
Yeah, exactly. So Bill Nelson, the undersheriff, kind of summed up the effort that they put into this. He said, "We worked for 8 solid days to begin with, and that was 24 hours a day for 8 days. We did some night searching. It was limited to a certain extent, but we always had people out in the field to make noise. So if somebody was out there now, Jaryd would have heard it. He would have maybe responded or went to." So, Bill is trying to say, we had people out there for 24 hours a day for 8 days straight.
Think about how hard it is to basically say you're giving up. Mm-hmm. Even though everybody knows that you're beyond a reasonable amount of time, how do you have to be the one to bear the weight of making the call of saying we're done?
Yeah. So Jane mentioned, I teased Jane. She actually made comments about the news media. So I don't remember this case back in 1999, but apparently it became a kind of a big nationwide story. Mm-hmm. Jane, who was on the K9 unit, she said it was very intense, very media friendly. I mean, there was media, CNN, so it became a real nationwide episode. So that put a lot of stress on us and a lot of stress on the dogs. Other accounts of kind of the media being a kind of a pest to the searchers. The current county sheriff, Justin Smith, was a sergeant with the department during the search, for which he was the public information officer. He said the crash added to the stress of the search that only grew more frustrating as the national media took notice. He said there were TV trucks and newspaper reporters swarming the remote site after a grand jury in another chilling child case, the death of JonBenet Ramsey. I do remember that case.
Oh, that's probably why we don't remember this one, is because that one definitely eclipsed everything that was going on in the news. Yeah,
so the JonBenet Ramsey case, I remember, was all over the news at the time.
Oh, yeah.
The current sheriff said 17 satellite trucks at one time lined up Colorado Highway 14 with anchors and fur coats walking around, and anybody and everybody calling us for information. He also said psychics professed to know where searchers could find Jaryd. Jeez. A barefooted man with a mule showed up at the search site ready to track him down. And even an American Indian came to perform a ritual asking the mountain to give up the boy. So it kind of turned into a freak show towards the end of the search.
It turned into a circus.
Yeah.
That's just got to be infuriating and frustrating.
Yeah. So the original search ended on October 8th, and several years go by with no clues, no evidence. This area was heavily searched, and they found nothing. So fast forward to June 5th of 2003. This is where Rob and Gareth come into play. So
Rob and Gareth were hikers, you said?
Yeah, these guys were kind of experienced backpackers that have hiked this area for many years. They're friends. They lived in the area. So Rob, now these are Rob's words. He writes, basically what we would do is pick an area we would like to hike and explore. And he's talking about Poudre Canyon. And he goes on to say, and so we went along the Big South Trail for the first time. Gorgeous hike, beautiful, beautiful river. This is really a wild area. And then Rob goes on to say, and the reason why Gary and I so much enjoy hiking together. So it's kind of like our group of friends. We like to hike together. So these guys have been doing it for years. Rob goes on to say, and then it was just coincidental that we wound up in a rock field and said, let's hike up that ridge. And I think it's about 2,000-foot hike up elevation to get to the top of it. But he goes, it's really remarkable country. Then Gareth goes, yeah, pretty much was like almost a scramble. So you're watching your feet, and basically you're just focused a few feet in front of you, your own feet, so you don't twist an ankle or something. So I've been on, hikes like that where it's like loose shale.
Oh yeah, you have video from when we did that in Montana. When we summited that mountain. I mean, it looked, and it wasn't that high up, but that scree was so bad it took way too long and was exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting because everything's moving under your feet, and you have to be really careful every step you take.
Oh yeah, it's like one step forward, half step back on every step.
And it takes an immense amount of concentration just so you don't slip and just go tumbling down. So yeah. That's what these guys are hiking up. So Rob goes on to say, we hiked that area a couple times before, and we had talked about the mystery of Jaryd, whether he had been swept downstream, abducted by a mountain lion, or if there had been something more sinister than that. This time we decided to go off trail, and we just walked right in. And we knew right away, they walked right in, and they found a shoe, like kind of lodged under a little outcropping for a rock. And Rob goes, we knew right away that it was probably Jaryd Atadero's clothes.
Oh, so they are aware that they were hiking an area where this kid went missing.
Yeah, so they mentioned a couple times that they hiked there and they kind of talked, like what happened to him, the theories they think might have happened.
Well, I mean, that's basically how the show started, is we'd always talk about that stuff and just said, hey, let's start recording it.
Right? Yeah. So the spot where they found the shoe was about 550 feet higher from Jaryd's last seen point. So pretty high up. And like we said, up a really rugged, loose rock, something that a 3-year-old's not going to be able to hike.
Well, or it will be very, and you get those scree fields, it's very visible.
Yeah.
It's not like wooded. So even if he was scrambling up this rock face during the search, you would have seen that. Yeah.
So Gareth goes on to describe the shoe. He goes, it was pretty pristine. It was like somebody had just took it off their right foot. It was fresh. I thought like I would see a kid standing in front of me. So I've seen pictures of these shoes. We'll post these on our Facebook page. The shoes look like they're fresh out of a box from the store.
Like not weathered at all?
Not weathered one bit for being up in the woods, the mountains for 3 years.
Jeez.
So Rob and Gareth continue to hike around that area, and they eventually find the other shoe, a brown fleece jacket, blue sweatpants turned inside out. And one pant leg was mostly scattered by birds that were using it as nesting material. So Rob and Gareth take photos. They leave everything untouched. They take photos of where they found everything. Then they picked up some of the clothing and they took it back down to the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office emailed the photos to Alan, who confirmed that they looked like the clothes that Jaryd was wearing.
Oh, that's got to be awful.
Yeah.
I had a sick feeling in my stomach the entire time you're talking about how they're like uncovering the clothes and stuff, and you're just imagining this poor 3-year-old kid like scared, confused, not understanding what's happening. So that's just awful.
So the next day, we're talking June 6th of 2003. It took searchers about an hour to reach the site near campsite 2, where they found the remaining clothing scattered across a 20-foot area. Some of the items were sheltered from the elements and some were exposed. So they said while the cloth jacket had what appeared to be puncture marks and the pants were tattered, the nylon shoes had little weathering. So it's very puzzling why the shoes looked so pristine. I don't think you'll find out from the when we get into the theories. No one really knows why, and I think people are kind of they're conveniently leaving that out of their explanation for what happened to Jaryd.
Okay.
So it's now June 14th, and a team of Larimer County Sheriff's Office members and search and rescue members and the Colorado Division of Wildlife and Necro Search meet at the Big South Trailhead to start searching for remains of Jaryd. And later Atadero and personnel from the local child protection network joined the group. So they're going back up there now to see if there's any other remains. They found the clothing and everything, but I think they were going up there to look for bones and things like that.
Yeah, just find the remains.
So 9:30 a.m. on the 14th, searchers hike in approximately 1.5 miles and make the 500-foot vertical climb up to the site where hikers had found the clothing. Now, it's about 11:30 a.m., and this is where it gets grisly. The searchers find a skull fragment, as they describe it as a skull cap, in a crevice and a tooth sitting on top of a log. And they said the skull was positioned in a way that would made it hard to see it from the air. You'd kind of have to be on the ground and looking at it from an angle.
Okay.
But it was like lodged in kind of a crevice. So not easy. It wouldn't have been easy to get it in there. And then one single molar sitting on top of a log.
So are you thinking, and you don't have to answer now if you want to wait till we get the theories, but are you thinking like foul play, or are you thinking like he was climbing in there to like try and hide or get warm, or?
I don't know. I'll get to my theories in a few minutes.
Okay. I'll try. I just really want to get there, so I'll slow down.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up the timeline here. It's 5 p.m. now on the 14th. So that massive team of people that went looking for the remains, they get back down and they address the media at the trailhead and kind of announce what they found. So to recap, they found his fleece jacket, kind of tattered blue sweatpants, 2 pristine nylon shoes, a skull cap, and a single tooth. So
Jeez.
it's very very strange, to find just a single tooth and a skull cap.
Yeah.
You wonder what happened to the rest of him. We've got some comments from the sheriff's department after this second recovery mission. So Bill said, now these are exact words, there were canine alerts that would go in that direction. Now, whether they were right at the scree field or before it, but they were at least alerting up the hill. That's why I'm reasonably certain we searched it, because when a dog alerts like that, we're thinking, okay, something must be up there. Let's go up there and search for it. But we never found anything. So that kind of leads me to think that this area where they found the tooth and the skull cap and the clothing was searched in the original search.
Yeah, and if he's still awake and moving and it's not recovery at that point, that really shouldn't be an issue. Like we said, on scree fields, like you can see people from a long ways away on those sides.
So, but now we have kind of conflicting information that came out of the official search and rescue report. They write, searchers on foot had never made it up to the 9,120 foot elevation at Jaryd's skull, where Jaryd's skull and tooth were found. The Air Force helicopter would have likely searched the area had it not crashed. So,
oh wow! So it could have possibly been an area that was supposed to get searched, and because the helicopter crashed, it was just completely overlooked.
That's what the report says, but you also have the undersheriff kind of conflicting with that, saying that they had canine alerts in that direction, and he believes it would have been searched. So, who do you believe? The official report, the undersheriff?
Well, I guess hope to God it's not one of those like he said, she said, he thinks she's doing something she's not.
Yeah.
And it's like what they trained us in for being a paramedic. When you're in a situation that's like chaotic and emergency, like the whole thing is, they teach us in CPR too. Like if somebody drops down, you're going to perform CPR and you notify somebody to call 911. Yeah. If you don't pick somebody out specifically and tell them to do it, like no one will do it because everyone thinks everyone else is doing it.
Yeah. That's interesting. And here's where our friend Les Stroud comes in. He kind of leads with a more mysterious outcome. He writes, I think whatever's happening is beyond our understanding. In a lot of these cases, search and rescue or the volunteers searching have already gone over the certain areas, not once, not twice, but even dozens of times. And then the child is found there maybe a year, maybe a few years later. So I don't know what point he's trying to get at, but I think he's stressing that in a lot of these cases, where they eventually find remains of these people. They've been searched multiple times.
Well, this is the second case that we've done that's happened.
Yeah. There was one question asked of Butch. So he was a friend of Alan and worked at the resort. They asked him, they said, "Is there any way Jaryd could have climbed up to that spot on his own?" He writes, "No way. Boy, that's a hard one. Not all the way. I couldn't see him going. He lived in a cabin. He's a 3-year-old. There's no way that would happen. I mean, it was a struggle for Gary and I to get there. Very rough terrain." So...
And that's a guy who interacts with this kid every day, all summer long, in mountainous regions. So it's like, I would take his word over anyone else's.